What I heard in French that night made me realize I wasn't just dealing with a dishonest real estate agent. I was facing someone who thought my age made me an easy target. Someone who assumed that because I spoke with a slight Western Canadian accent, I couldn't possibly understand the elaborate scheme he was discussing right in front of me. He was wrong on both counts. My name is Thomas Chen, and I'm 63 years old. I taught high school French in Calgary for 35 years before I retired 2 years ago. These days, I spend my time woodworking in my garage, volunteering at the library, and taking care of my late wife Margaret's garden. People see an older Asian man with gray hair and reading glasses, and they make assumptions. Usually, I don't mind. But what happened last month changed everything. It started on a Tuesday evening in October. I was in my backyard, raking leaves under the maple tree Margaret and I planted when we first bought this house in 1987. The evening light was beautiful, that golden hour photographers love, and I was thinking about Margaret. She'd been gone for 18 months, and the house felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories. I'd been considering selling it, maybe moving into something smaller, a condo perhaps. My daughter Emma, who lives in Vancouver, had been gently suggesting it for months. That's when I heard my fence gate open. I turned to see David Park, my best friend of 40 years, walking up the path with a younger man I didn't recognize. David and I met when we were both young teachers at the same school. He taught math, I taught French, and we bonded over terrible coffee in the staff room and our shared experience as Asian immigrants trying to make it in Calgary in the 80s. "Thomas," David called out, smiling. "Hope you don't mind us dropping by." This is my son, Sean. He's visiting from Toronto. I'd heard about Sean over the years, but never met him. David's first marriage ended badly, and Sean grew up in Ontario with his mother. They'd reconnected a few years ago, and David was thrilled to have his son back in his life. Sean was in his mid-30s, tall, with styled hair, and an expensive-looking jacket. He had David's eyes, but none of his warmth. His handshake was firm, almost aggressive. "Dad's told me a lot about you," Sean said. "Retired teacher, right? Must be nice, taking it easy." There was something dismissive in his tone, but I ignored it. David looked so happy to have his son there. "I was just telling Sean you might be thinking of selling this place," David continued. "He's a real estate agent now, doing very well in Toronto. He offered to give you some advice, maybe help you out." I hadn't actually decided to sell, just considering it, but David had picked up on my hints during our last coffee. "That's kind of you," I said to Sean, "though I haven't made up my mind yet." "Well, that's exactly why you need professional guidance," Sean said smoothly. "Most people your age don't understand the current market. It's complicated. But lucky for you, I'm here to help. Why don't I come by tomorrow evening? Take a look around, give you a proper assessment. No obligation, of course, just helping out Dad's old friend." The phrase "people your age" rubbed me the wrong way, but David looked so hopeful. "Sure," I said. "Tomorrow evening works." After they left, I stood in the garden for a while, watching the last light fade. Something felt off about Sean, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe I was just being suspicious because I wasn't used to dealing with real estate agents. Maybe I was too used to being alone. The next evening, Sean arrived at 7 sharp, driving a BMW that looked brand new. He was alone this time. I'd made tea, the way Margaret used to when we had guests. "Nice place," Sean said, walking through my living room with barely a glance at the family photos on the walls, the bookshelf full of French literature, the piano in the corner that no one played anymore. "But it's outdated. You'll need renovations before selling. New kitchen, new bathrooms. Probably $50,000–$60,000 worth of work." I felt my stomach drop. That much? At least, and even then, in this neighborhood. He trailed off, shaking his head. "Look, Mr. Chen, I'm going to be straight with you, because you're Dad's friend. This area isn't what it used to be. Property values are declining. If you want to get anything for this place, you need to sell fast, before it drops further." That didn't match what I'd been reading in the papers. This neighborhood was actually doing quite well. I thought property values in Calgary were... "Media reports are always behind," Sean interrupted. "I see the real numbers. Trust me, You want to move quickly on this. I actually have a buyer who's interested in properties in this area. Chinese investor, cash deal, quick closing. He's not picky about condition. I could probably get you 400,000. 400,000? I'd had the house assessed 6 months ago when updating my insurance. It was worth at least 650,000, possibly more. My teaching career had taught me to recognize when someone was lying, and Sean was definitely lying. But I kept my expression neutral. That seems low. I know it's hard to hear, Sean said, his voice oozing false sympathy. But that's the market reality. And honestly, at your age, do you really want the stress of listing, showings, negotiations? This investor pays cash, no inspection, closing in 3 weeks. Clean and simple. Perfect for someone in your situation. Someone in my situation. An elderly widower, alone, probably confused about finances. That's what he saw. Let me think about it, I said carefully. Of course. No pressure. He pulled out a business card. But don't wait too long. I've got 3 other properties I'm showing him this week. This opportunity might not last. As he walked to the door, he pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke in French, rapid and casual, clearly assuming I wouldn't understand. Wise, je suis encore très le vieux. Facile comme cible. Il va signer d'ici la fin de la semaine. Yeah, I'm still at the old guy's place. Easy target. He'll sign by the end of the week. I felt ice in my stomach but kept my face blank. Sean glanced at me, smiled, and switched back to English. Talk soon, Mr. Chen. Think about what I said. After he left, I sat in Margaret's favorite chair for a long time. I'd spent 35 years teaching French to teenagers in Calgary. I'd lived in Montreal for 4 years during university. I'd spent a summer in Quebec City doing an intensive teaching program. My French was flawless, accent and all. And this young man, this son of my best friend, thought he could scam me. But it was worse than just overheard rudeness. He was trying to steal my house. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to know exactly what Sean was planning before I said anything to David. Accusing his son of fraud without proof would destroy our friendship. I needed to be certain. I called Sean the next day. I've been thinking about your offer. I'd like to discuss it more. Could you come by again? Maybe bring your investor? Sean sounded pleased. Absolutely. Let me arrange that. How about Friday evening? I'll bring my business partner too. He handles the legal side. Friday evening, Sean arrived with another man. Late 30s, sharp suit, carrying a leather briefcase. This is Marc Rousseau, Sean introduced him. He'll handle the paperwork. They spoke English at first, laying out the deal. 400,000, cash, closing in 3 weeks. Mark had contracts ready. It's a lot to take in, I said slowly, playing the confused elderly man they expected. Maybe you could explain it again? Sean and Mark exchanged a glance. Then Sean switched to French. Il ne comprend rien. Ça va être plus facile que je pensais. He understands nothing. This is going to be easier than I thought. Mark responded in French. Tu es sûr qu'il va signer? Il a l'air hésitant. Are you sure he'll sign? He seems hesitant. Sean laughed. Ces vieux immigrants asiatiques, ils font toujours confiance aux fils de leurs amis. En plus, il est seul, probablement un peu sénile. On va le pousser un peu, il va craquer. Une fois qu'on a la maison à 400 000, on la revend pour 700 000 le mois prochain. Profit de 300 000, divisé entre nous deux et le investisseur chinois fictif. These old Asian immigrants, they always trust their friends' sons. Plus he's alone, probably a bit senile. We'll push him a bit. He'll crack. Once we get the house for 400,000, we flip it for 700,000 next month. 300,000 profit, split between us and the fictional Chinese investor. Mark grinned. Et ton père ne se doutera de rien? And your father won't suspect anything? Mon père est un idiot naïf. Il pense que je suis devenu un homme d'affaires respectable. Il n'a aucune idée de combien j'ai escroqué à Toronto avant de devoir déménager ici. My father is a naive idiot. He thinks I've become a respectable businessman. He has no idea how many people I scammed in Toronto before having to move here. I felt sick. Not just about the scam, but about David. My friend was being used too. but I kept my expression confused and uncertain. "I'm sorry," I said in English. "Could you go through the timeline again? When would I need to move out?" They spent another 30 minutes pressuring me, speaking English to me and French to each other whenever they wanted to discuss tactics. I heard everything. How they'd done this to 3 other elderly people in Toronto. How they'd forge documents if needed. How they'd pressure me by saying David was disappointed I didn't trust his son. Finally, I said, "I need to talk to my daughter in Vancouver first. Can I call you on Monday?" Sean's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered. "Of course. But remember, the investor is looking at other properties. Monday is fine, but I can't guarantee the offer will still stand after that." After they left, I sat in the dark for a while. Then I picked up the phone and called an old colleague, Jennifer Wu, who'd left teaching to become a real estate lawyer. I told her everything. "Thomas, this is serious fraud," she said. "You need to report this to the police." "I will. But I need to handle David first. He's my best friend. His son is destroying people's lives, and David has no idea." "Be careful," Jennifer warned. "These people sound dangerous." Over the weekend, I gathered evidence. I'd recorded Friday's conversation on my phone. Jennifer helped me document everything, including the fraudulent purchase agreement Mark had left. We discovered Sean wasn't even a licensed real estate agent in Alberta. The Toronto address on his business card was a mailbox store. On Monday morning, I called David. "Can you come over?" "Without Sean. I need to talk to you about something important." He arrived looking worried. "Is everything okay? You sounded serious." I made tea, the way we'd done 1,000 times over 40 years. Then I told him everything. His face went from confusion to disbelief to devastation. "No," he kept saying. "No, Sean wouldn't. He's changed. He's trying to build a legitimate career." I showed him the recording. Played the parts where Sean called him a naive idiot, where he bragged about scamming people in Toronto. David's face crumbled. He aged 10 years in those moments. "How did you understood their French?" "David, I taught French for 35 years. I lived in Montreal. I understand every word." He sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice broken. "What am I going to do?" "You're going to help me stop him," I said gently, "before he hurts someone else, before he hurts you even more." That evening, I called Sean. "I've decided to accept the offer. Can we meet tonight to sign the papers?" Sean sounded triumphant. "Excellent decision, Mr. Chen. We'll be there at 7. I called Jennifer. She called the police. We set everything up. At 7 o'clock, Sean and Mark arrived, contracts in hand. They walked into my living room and froze. David was there. So was Jennifer, and 2 police officers in plain clothes. "What's going on?" Sean demanded, his confidence cracking. I stood up, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I spoke in French. Perfect, fluent, Montreal-accented French. "Ce qui se passe, Sean, c'est que j'ai compris chaque mot que tu as dit, chaque insulte, chaque plan, chaque mensonge." "What's happening, Sean, is that I understood every word you said. Every insult, every plan, every lie." His face went white. Mark took a step backward. I continued in French. "Tu pensais que j'étais une cible facile, un vieil homme confus qui ne comprendrait pas. Mais j'ai enseigné le français pendant 35 ans. J'ai vécu au Québec, et j'ai tout enregistré." You thought I was an easy target, a confused old man who wouldn't understand. But I taught French for 35 years. I lived in Quebec, and I recorded everything. I switched to English, looking at the police officers. I have recordings of them discussing their fraud scheme in detail. Plans to defraud me of approximately $250,000. Admissions of similar frauds in Toronto. The officers stepped forward. "Sean Park and Mark Rousseau, you're under arrest for attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and practicing real estate without a license." As they read him his rights, Sean looked at his father. "Dad, you have to believe me. I wasn't really going to." "Don't," David said quietly. "Just don't." The police took them away. Jennifer stayed to help with statements. David sat in Margaret's chair, looking broken. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know he's your son." "He stopped being my son the moment he tried to hurt my best friend," David said. "Thank you for not letting me remain blind to what he really is." "You couldn't have known." "I should have. There were signs. I just, I wanted so badly to believe he'd changed." He looked at me. "All this time, you've been fluent in French? 35 years of teaching. You were there for most of them." "I sat through so many staff meetings while you discussed French curriculum. I never realized you were that fluent. I thought you just taught basic high school French." "I went to Montreal for university, fell in love with the language. Margaret and I even considered moving there before we settled in Calgary." I smiled sadly. "She always said my French was better than my English." "She would have been proud of how you handled this," David said softly. "Standing up for yourself, protecting others." Over the next few weeks, the case developed. The police discovered Sean and Mark had defrauded 4 elderly people in Toronto out of nearly $1 million total. They were facing serious criminal charges. More victims came forward. David and I met for coffee every week, like we had for 40 years. He was devastated but determined to make things right. He contacted Sean's Toronto victims, offered to help them recover their losses however he could. "I raised him badly," he said one afternoon. "His mother and I, we were so young, so focused on fighting each other. I wasn't there for him. And now look what he became." "You can't blame yourself for his choices," I said. "He's an adult. He chose this path." "Maybe. But I chose to be blind when I should have been asking questions." I ended up not selling the house. Working with Jennifer on the case reminded me that I still had purpose, still had value. I started volunteering at a community center, teaching conversational French to immigrants. Turned out there was a huge demand for it, especially from people who wanted to move to Quebec or just wanted to connect with Canada's francophone culture. One evening, about 2 months after everything happened, I was in my garden again. Emma had come to visit from Vancouver. She was helping me plant some new bulbs for spring. "Dad," she said, "I've been thinking, you don't have to sell this house, but maybe you don't have to stay alone in it either. What if we converted the basement into a suite? You could rent it out, have someone else in the house, or I could move back from Vancouver, help you with the upkeep." "You'd leave Vancouver?" I asked, surprised. "I've been offered a job transfer to Calgary. I was hesitant because I worried about you being alone. But after everything that happened, Dad, you're not helpless. You never were. I just want to be closer." We planted the bulbs together as the sun set. I thought about Margaret, about how she'd always said that our house was meant to be full of life and voices. Maybe she was right. A few weeks later, I got a letter from David. He'd decided to take early retirement from teaching. He was going to volunteer with an organization that helped fraud victims, using his experience to help others avoid what happened to Sean's victims. "I can't change what Sean did," he wrote, "but I can help prevent it from happening to others. And maybe, in some small way, that's enough." I kept the letter on my desk, next to a photo of Margaret. Next to it, I placed my French teaching certificate from the University of Montreal, dated 1982. 43 years old, that certificate. I'd forgotten I even had it until I went looking through old boxes. People see an elderly Asian man with gray hair and reading glasses, and they make assumptions. They assume age means weakness, that being polite means being ignorant, that speaking with an accent means you don't understand. Sean made all those assumptions. He was wrong on every count, but here's what I learned through all of this. It's not enough to know things. Sometimes you have to show people you know, especially when they're counting on your silence to commit their crimes. My years of teaching had taught me patience, observation, strategy, when to speak up and when to stay quiet, when to reveal what you know and when to keep listening. Margaret used to tell me I was too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. Maybe she was right, but she also taught me that kindness isn't the same as naivety. You can be kind and still be wise. You can give people chances while still protecting yourself. These days, I'm teaching French 3 times a week at the community center. My students range from teenagers to people in their 70s, all wanting to connect with a part of Canadian culture they hadn't explored before. I tell them about Montreal, about Quebec City, about the beauty of the French language and how it shaped my life. And sometimes, when a student asks me why I became a French teacher, I tell them this story, not to make myself look heroic, but to remind them that knowledge is power, that languages connect us to worlds beyond our immediate experience, that learning something new, whether you're 20 or 70, is never wasted. Last week, I got an email from one of Sean's Toronto victims, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson. The police had recovered some of her money, and she wanted to thank me for speaking up. If you hadn't caught him, she wrote, he would have just kept going, kept hurting people. You saved more than just yourself. I think about that sometimes, about how one decision to stay silent or speak up can ripple outward in ways we can't predict. I think about David, channeling his pain into helping others. I think about Emma, moving back to Calgary to be closer to her old father. I think about my French students, discovering a new way to see Canada. And I think about Margaret, who would have handled this whole situation with more grace than I managed, but who I hope would be proud that I didn't let them take advantage of me. That I used what I'd learned over 63 years of life to protect not just myself, but others too. The house doesn't feel so empty anymore. Emma moved into the basement suite last month. We have dinner together twice a week. David still comes for coffee every Thursday. My French students sometimes drop by to practice conversation. The garden Margaret loved is blooming again. Sean and Mark are facing 5 to 10 years for their fraud convictions. David visits Sean once a month in prison. He says Sean still doesn't understand what he did wrong, still thinks he just made bad business decisions. Maybe he'll never understand. But that's not David's responsibility anymore, or mine. What matters is that we speak up when we see wrong being done, especially when the wrongdoers think we're too old, too foreign, too quiet to matter. They thought my age made me invisible. They thought my accent made me ignorant. They were wrong. I'm 63 years old. I've taught thousands of students. I've buried a wife I loved for 40 years. I've watched the world change in ways I never imagined when I first arrived in Canada as a young immigrant in 1981. And through it all, I've learned that the greatest power we have isn't physical strength or youth or wealth. It's knowledge. It's observation. It's the patience to wait for the right moment to reveal what we know. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.